All right, everyone. Welcome to our last class. What we're gonna do today, we're gonna talk about adulthood for the most part. I'm also going to um, save some time towards the end for any questions. I'm, I'm trying to do that as other people join kind of later, um, if there are any questions. And then um, we'll have a couple of discussion times as well today. And it's a smaller group. Looks like, well, so far, it looks like a little bit smaller class, which is great. So usually what that means is we can have a little bit more discussion actually in the class, which will be good too. So what we're going to do today is talk through starting, you know, the kind of the transition from adolescence to adulthood, and then I'm gonna head towards um, late adulthood, but probably I don't know if I'll get there. I'll get close. Um, the uh, the slides are coming straight out of the book, and so if you want to grab those, there's 3 slides on Moodle, like I was saying earlier. You can grab those and check them out. Um, there's a ton of slides. It's basically just some slides that I've put together from a couple of different chapters of the book, and so I'm gonna use those today with our discussion as well. We still got people coming in here. Okay. Um, so I was going to tell you. Not important. Okay. So um, when we think about where we've been, when we've done the childhood, adolescent, now adulthood. So if we think about those three, and obviously those are large developmental spans. You know, when you have this kind of view of self in childhood, then your identity in adolescence, which really kind of carries over into early or young adult, either early adulthood, young adulthood, emerging adult. There's lots of names for it that people use, but that identity piece is something that does carry over as you go through. And so there's a lot of interesting things to think about adulthood. For example, like, you know, when does someone become an adult, right? So um, there's some legal time frames that come to mind, like turning 18 is a big step, and then turning 21 is kind of a big transition, or it used to be. Um, and so, you know, it's not really debate, but there's a lot of discussion. If you read into this research enough, there's still a lot of discussion about when someone becomes an adult. Is that based on money or financial independence? Is that based on, if they've gone to college? Is that based on having a job? Is that based on being out, like living on your own? I mean, there's lots of different ways to kind of look at it. Developmentally, like we've talked about pretty much this whole time, developmental stage wise, that hasn't necessarily changed that much. Um, but our environment has changed drastically. So it's interesting if you think about it. Most people or most research kind of points to the fact that the transition happens somewhere between 18 and 25. And it's usually also during that time frame, that 18 to 25, there's usually, experimentation, exploration that happens during that time, um, especially like in work and relationships. Um, there's a lot of times, and I actually have, I don't have as many clients now because I don't work with this age group as much, but um, there's a certain amount of people that still feel as though they fall behind at times during this time frame, mainly because let's say someone graduates, but they don't go to college. They kind of work for a little while, but all their friends go to college. So that maybe puts them maybe a little bit behind. Then they eventually go to college, and then they're there a little bit later where all their friends have progressed, and then they're kind of comparing themselves. Sometimes they feel like they've fallen behind, let's say, because the tradition for a long time has been go to high school, graduate, go to college, get a job. That's kind of been a traditional route, even though it's not necessarily the case for everyone. Uh, there's always going to be gaps in that process, um, but uh, this is also a time when if 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 someone wants to, you can kind of transform your life, so to speak, because you have the ability to leave home and kind of be on your own and kind of figure out how you like to do things and how you want to do things and what that looks like. You can also focus on the things that you believe that are important. Do you want to capture and hold all the beliefs that you've grown up with, or all of the do you want to make decisions in a certain way? You have kind of like an opportunity to do that pretty freely without a lot of supervision, let's say. And so that definitely happens between that kind of 18 to 25 time frame for the most part. Uh, Sometimes it might happen a little earlier. It mostly doesn't happen later, but during that time frame is kind of when that might start happening for people. And so that's one of the reasons why there's a little bit of discussion about, okay, during that time frame, we're saying that's a pretty big gap of time. That's when someone kind of becomes an adult. Um, the interesting thing to me about it is, and there's a lot of data about this too, there's still a role that parents play in that transition into adulthood. And there's still a role or opportunities they can have to contribute to, you know, that transition. Now their role is changed and a little bit different. I was meeting with a client this week, or maybe it was last week, that was talking about just like their childhood, and we weren't talking about anything specific. They were just talking about some rules and things and how their father in their house was very strict and very rigid, and the mom was a little flexible, but the dad was pretty inflexible, pretty rigid. And as as this my client got older, some of the activities and behaviors started to buck up against that rigidity a little bit. And by the time they were 18, 19, basically they were told to leave the house, which that does happen. And so that's kind of what they did. The interesting thing about that was that when they left the house, they found themselves unable to really know what to do or how to go about anything. I mean, they kind of continued to look for someone to kind of tell them what to do or how to guide them, or should I do it this way or that way. They weren't really able to make a lot of really decisions on their own, which kind of comes with some of that rigidity. But also one of the things we talked about was the fact that as and I think we've talked about this last time too, if you think about having the same rules in childhood and then continuing those specific rules for your kids as they become 18, 19, 20, that's a little bit of a recipe for disaster. For example, and this was one of the examples that my client actually talked about, was that they had this as he got older. Now this would have been like middle school, high school. Kind of like, hey, you can hang out with friends, but you got to be back at like a certain time, and I'm going to pick you up, kind of stuff. And it was a certain time frame, which made a ton of sense at that age. But that time frame, I'm making this up. I think it was like 10 or 9 or something. Well, that time doesn't really match as you become 20. Like you have to be home when you're in my house. You have to be home by 9. That's a little bit of a strange rule if you think about rules. And so, and that's just an example of being kind of rigid. And that caused basically my client and their parent to kind of be at odds for a number of years. Um, not in a, it wasn't like they stopped talking, but they just had a hard time. One of the reasons is because it's a normal process for human beings to begin exploring and experimenting as they get older. Now, doesn't mean that there's no consequences. There's definitely consequences to certain things that you do. And so, unfortunately, some of the consequences are bigger as you get older too. Um, but you can also, as as um, as people individually transition into adulthood, parenting styles can also transition into adulthood and how you actually parent. That can happen too. I think I've brought this up before. One of the there's two indicators of a fairly pretty healthy family dynamic, and that is how flexible and adaptable they are, and basically how flexible and adaptable they can be as their kids go through these different developmental transitions. Um, because the one thing that you want, and this is something that would be a clinical focus as well, the one thing that you want is for an adolescent to go from an adolescent to an adult to be competent and be healthy and be able to um, have critical thinking and be able to kind of work out, make decisions and that kind of thing. Not be perfect because you're still going to make mistakes, but being more competent. And that becomes very important the older we get, and especially when we enter into this transition from adolescence to adulthood. So um, I think there's a couple of things that are like you can look at as markers. Um, and the book's going to talk about it more than this, but like being able to hold a job, being able to kind of be on your own financially, and also taking responsibility for yourself. Those are big markers to coming into adulthood. Big markers. That last one, taking responsibility for yourself, is something that is both learned and discovered at the same time. And so, if you grow up in a family that blames everybody else for everything that happens, what do you think the kids are going to do? They're going to blame everybody else for everything that happens, and that doesn't help them at all. You have to learn to take responsibility for the things that happen. Now, that doesn't mean take responsibility for everything that happens, but just taking responsibility for your part.
Well,
Those
hey, Dr.
those
Vedder,
things are
real
big.
quick. I mean, it sounds like, I mean, these parents are the ones that also need to get in therapy. I mean, because I don't know, like, I'm 52, so like I feel my Gen X generation is more adaptable and is more flexible with our children because I'm seeing it with my friends and their kids. Whereas the other side, our parents, that generation just doesn't seem flexible. My parents are extremely inflexible, and it's getting in the way. But another story. But I mean, I think that takes a lot of awareness on the parents to come in and go, hold on a second, you know.
Yeah, it does. I think it matters. So clinically speaking, um, and I said this last time, there there's no way any of you are going to work with people and not run into some kind of parenting situation or something that you're going to have to ask about in terms of parenting. That is inevitable. I can't even think of clients I work with now that hasn't come up at least once. Now that might not be the main focus per se.
How do you get around that when you know in your head that that's an issue,
well,
you know?
that's sometimes people don't know it's an issue, right? I mean, we've talked about styles, right? So an authoritarian style of parenting, for example, they're not gonna they're not gonna think that another style would be okay because that's the only style, right? That's everything's black and white, right? Everything is this way. That there's no discussion, there's no debate. This is how it goes, right? Period. Um, Now the flip side of that, like being neglectful, that's not helpful either. Where pretty much you figure everything out on your own. There's no presence. There's no anything, and that's not helpful either, right? So extremes aren't helpful either way when we talk about it. Um, and there's a significant amount of people that are doing this pretty well too. It's not, I'm just talking about clinically, the people that you usually get are people that what aren't doing things well, right? There's usually always a little bit of dysfunction. There's probably like the conflict's probably high. People don't necessarily know how to handle the conflict. You're not getting healthy people in the therapy room, right? We're getting people that, now I'm not saying that they're like totally messed up and beyond help. Not saying that either, but you're not necessarily getting people that are, do pretty good. Everything goes pretty well. Um, uh, but you're getting people that are like struggling, especially right now. And we're going to talk about this here in a little bit. There's a growing number of adult children still having issues with their adult parents over whatever, and they're starting to be therapy with adult children. I'm talking about adults like 40 and 50-year-old children with their 60, 70-year-old parents. That's starting to become more, uh, almost so acceptable. It's always acceptable. There's more prevalent. Though that's happening
Well,
too.
I think it's that. I mean, I go back to that. I mean, it could be that generational thing. I mean, I'm 52, and if my parents wanted to really face it up and go to therapy, I'd be one of those cats too, right? But I mean, it seems like those boomer generations, man, they seem a little more strict than I know I've been, I guess. I mean, I've raised my kids with a pretty good hand, but not like
Hmm.
that.
Well,
And I guess I want to go back too is also like I had a client, I'm a personal trainer and I kind of work with kiddos and people in recovery. And so
mhm,
I got this guy who was 18. He was a grown adult, but he had just gone out of a sober living home. He's in a sober living home. So I was working with him. And his dad had called me and said, work with him 3 days a week, just to strength train him, because it'll help him mentally. So, well, I got that kid talk. I mean, that kid was talking, and I realized real quick, these parents were coming down this kid so hard with what they were doing at home, slipping gummies by themselves, drinking under the table, not in front of the kids, getting wasted. But meanwhile, they want their kid to. I'm like, that's a big issue because that's an environment thing.
right. Yeah. That's not a boomer thing either, by the way. That's
Well,
every
I know I'm
generation.
through. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know, but it just seems I'm going on my perspective of my
Right.
52 year
Sure.
old. All my
Yeah.
friends' parents are boomers, etc.
Sure.
So,
No, I'm not. Yeah. Let me have a quick sidebar about generation talk. Um, I'm not a gargantuan fan of generation discussions necessarily, mainly because pretty much every generation thinks the ones after them are wrong or something, or the ones before them did it wrong. I mean, that's just the boomer generation had problems with the generation before them, and that's really when it started with this generation division didn't even start until really the boomer generation, then Generation X, and then millennial. I mean, now you can say generation fill in the blank, and everyone has a stereotypical image in their head, and that's not necessarily fair or accurate. However, there's definitely some aspects of it that um, every generation has for sure. At the same time, uh, there are plenty of, like right now, for example, like in the millennial generation, they're all parents now. But most of them are in their 30s, some of them early 40s, so they have kids. They're struggling with the same things that Generation X parents struggled with in a different environment, totally different environment, right? The kids that they have never known anything but screens. Generation X parents, their kids didn't know screens per se until a certain time frame. So that aspect of our culture and our environment has shifted lots and lots of things. And so when it comes down to it, we all struggle with very similar things because developmentally we're still going through the same developmental stages. It's just that the other the other thing that we just have more of is information. There's lots of information out there about everything, you name it. I could say something right now, and this has happened in class multiple times. I could say something in class right now, and anyone could go look it up on Google and find either 5 things that refute what I said or 5 things that say, yeah, that's right. It's pretty easy, right? That ability alone, that kind of information overload, has really kind of, I think, has been something that's very difficult to work through. And then if we move that into the clinical sphere, it's super common that as you work with people, they've already Googled what's going on in their with them, or they've already, WebMD'd it, or they've already looked, or they heard someone say something about a podcast or a TikTok or a YouTube channel, and they've already seen it all. They've watched it. I work in attachment theory a lot. I actually had to study attachment for like a long time. I read about it, studied it, wrote about it. I've got people now that come on and say, "Hey, I'm an anxious attachment." I was watching the podcast and they were talking about it, and I think that's what I am. And I'm thinking, man, that's awesome that you. I'm super glad people are aware of things that are going on. That's great. At the same time, there's a lot of nuance to attachment, even. And you're not anxious attachment. You that's you have a tendency towards anxious attachment. It means that you know that when you get close to someone, the closer you get to commitment, the more nervous and scared you get, and you start to pull away or push away, but you don't want to pull away or push away. It's a kind of a tug of war a little bit. And so there's some nuance to it. That doesn't mean you're trapped in that style either. So the same thing with parenting. Same thing with parenting, at all levels: childhood, adolescent, and emerging adult. There's tons of information out there about how to parent and what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And you know, I mean, uh, it's just out there. There's information everywhere. And so one of the things that and I've talked about this last time, being a clinician, it's very important for us also to be able to read and research and know what the data says on different developments. I mean, in terms of like our developmental phases, that hasn't, like I said, that hasn't changed. But our environment changes, and that has effect on or impact on the way in which we develop. And so it's very important for us to kind of know, like for example, when we talked about these 4 different parenting styles, that's something we should know. That's something that's important to us. We're going to talk about something here in a little bit in terms of like relationship. There's just some foundational relationship information that we should just know as clinicians. That can be very, very helpful. And
Professor,
so, yeah.
quick question. Just having said that, do you think it's important to understand as a clinician, like our clients' value system and how they see the world? Just because, and I say that to say just how they process information and how they validate whether things are factual or not. Because it seems like information is only as good as the way that you see it as being true. So it's kind of like, do they understand it in a way that is helpful for them?
Who defines that?
That's just, yeah, it's a personal thing, right? So
Yeah, how do we define helpful, healthy, normal process? Like that's great. That's a great question, Ben. This is a great point. It's a great point. Like some of this is dependent upon perspective, right? Like what someone's perspective is, maybe a belief system, which could be their values or like their morality potentially, where they get their information, how people process information. Are people, um, do people look at something already with their mind made up, or do you look at it with an open mind? I mean, there's lots of different variables. Um, I think the one thing that we as a helping profession that we probably all walk the tightrope on is um, helping people feel better, think better is not the same as helping people make decisions. We don't make decisions for people, and we especially don't make personal decisions for them. That's not our job. Our job is to remain um, non-judgmental, um, have very genuine warmth to ourselves, be empathetic. Um, it doesn't mean that we can't ask questions. Um, and so I think that I think it's some of what you're asking is I think is difficult for a lot of different reasons, and that some of that is because of so much of the information that's out there, like all kinds of information, right? Just in general. And I'm just talking about like I'm not even talking about if we talk about looking at the news or politics, or I'm not even talking about that. Like set that to the side. I'm just saying, like right now, this I've thought about doing this as an assignment. You know, you could go out there and find multiple podcasts, TikToks, you know, uh, different kinds of posts that are very specific to all kinds of mental health areas right now. Um, they're out there everywhere, childhood, adolescent, whatever. Um, and I'd love to, you know, sometimes I'm like sometimes I'm always curious, like how do they get their information, where are they coming from, how do they, you know, synthesize it and then present it, because it's almost like now as a society we're leaning a little bit less away from like, you know, doing the reading ourselves versus going and getting it fed to us by, you know, another source, which I'm not saying is necessarily bad. We can use, like I gave you guys or put a video up from a TED talk that I thought was really good. That the lady that did the TED talk, that's like mounds of research she put into that 12 minutes. I mean, you know, it's condensed into, you know, a pretty bite-sized chunk. And I'm a fan of that too. So, um, but at the same time, how do we process information and how do we help our clients process information? That's a great question. I'm more interested in what's going on with your emotions, and are your emotions like are they helping you, hurting you? Like your thoughts, like when you talk to yourself, is it positive self-talk? Is it negative self-talk? Um, is like that stuff is important to me because that's the stuff that we as clinicians can have the most direct impact on, all of us. Um, and when we do that, that automatically helps people automatically. Right? Does that make sense? Because if you look at the data, 71% of our thoughts are on the negative slant per day. We have thousands of thoughts, right? That's not abnormal. That's normal. Okay. Unless we're aware of it and can kind of guide it differently, that's what we do, which is probably one of the reasons why we'll always need mental health providers because we are there to kind of help people with some of those thoughts, if that makes sense. So great questions. I mean, this is some of the stuff you guys are asking, which I think is awesome, and some of the stuff I'm even talking about now will definitely be addressed as you get into like some of the techniques, like when you take classes on, you know, techniques of therapy and different models of therapy and how to actually work with people in the room. You're definitely going to start talking about some of this stuff because this is stuff that's going to come up too, right? It's hard for us not to talk about it in this class because this class we're talking about all the age groups, you know, that we work with and all the issues that could come up. So it's hard not to address some of it as we go, if that makes sense. So I'm often accused of going on rabbit trails, which I totally do. And I know for some people it really frustrates them and some people don't care, but I try my best to kind of stay where we're at. But this class lends itself to kind of going off the trail a little bit because of all the topics that we bring up. Um, does that make sense? Hopefully, what Ben, I don't even know if that answers your question. That was a super long answer to a really short question.
Yeah, yeah, it did. Because I think the last time we met, I think you said our primary focus is to kind of really get them to be able to deal with life in a healthy way. So you're
Yeah.
not so focused on how they're processing it, but how they're responding to it. So I think that it really did answer that.
Yeah. And this is a question that when you work with anybody, and they're really struggling and keep, whether it's a conflict they're struggling with, or they just can't figure something out, or things tend to keep going the direction they don't really want. I mean, that kind of stuff. And when people get stuck, I mean, it can be overwhelming. One of the questions that I use is, how is that working for you? You know, how is the system that you have in, basically, I don't say it this way necessarily, but like, how does the systems and the processes you have in place, how is it helping you? And that makes them start thinking about solutions and not just problems, right? We want, in some ways, now that's a solution focused technique. So brief solution focused therapy offers some really, I think, some really good questions to help people kind of get out of a like a negative rut even, and let them start thinking solution based versus problem based. For example, this sounds really weird. I've done it many times when I have clients that are stuck in griping, complaining, worry, blaming, and it's a natural thing to do as a human being. I'll often ask, like, and this is going to sound weird, but think about it. How is this situation not worse? Like, all of these things are happening. I'm wondering how it's not worse than it is, which really takes people off guard. And I just sit there and let that, I don't even say anything because it takes people off guard. What makes them automatically start to do what? Think about why it's not worse, right? Well, I do this, that's, those can be helpful um, in any life stage, really. It can be helpful. So asking questions, I'm kind of going back to what Ben was asking a little bit. Asking questions like that can help kind of generate more of a positive direction a little bit. And then you can kind of help them. Um, then you can kind of help them like work through whatever, whatever's going on. It really, and again, that just depends on the situation and what's going on with them. But
Man, I never would have thought of that. I never would have thought about reversing that question. I like
me
that.
neither. I didn't either. I got it from
Yeah.
somebody.
Wow, that's great.
I didn't think about it either. I didn't make it up. It's not mine. But
Well, it seems like it just automatically flip the script and go, well, hold on. I mean, look at the stuff I am doing. It's like,
yeah, that I think there's just sometimes I think a good question is a real. I'm talking about a good question. A good question is worth more than 5 good pieces of advice all day. Like a really good one, right? Um, and that's why using, trying to starting to form good questions is important. Um, and trying to think through how to ask questions. And you'll get better at it as you go too. Once you kind of do work with people long enough, you'll get better. And leading people, to kind of figure things out can be helpful too. And the thing about this is that a good question is true. That's true for every developmental stage too. There's a reason why there's actually been a resurgence in the Socratic method in therapy. The Socratic method has been around for quite a long time, people, thousands of years. There's a reason why, because the Socratic method is basically based on, being able to kind of ask these really good questions to help people. Not just observation, but, be able to ask questions. So I just kind of think that's interesting. There's actually some pretty interesting trainings on that right now. Okay. All right, I'm going to transition to something a little bit different. Man, every time I bring this up, it puts it on the wrong side of my screen. I don't like that. Okay, there we go. Is all this making sense? Hopefully. I mean, please don't hesitate to ask. We have a small enough class. We can, you guys can jump in with questions anytime. That will not be a problem at all. Okay. Now I want to make a little bit of a transition because I do want to talk more about adulthood a little bit. We're going to shortchange the young adult developmental stage a little bit, but I do want to talk about adulthood in terms of like entering into what's typically called middle adulthood, which is kind of an interesting, I don't know. So middle adulthood technically is like 40, between 40, 45 up to 60, 65. is what's technically called that middle adulthood, which kind of leaves this kind of 25 to 30 or 25 to 30 year old kind of early adulthood. I'm actually gonna talk about basically from 30 up right now, like 30 up into your 60s. So I'm gonna kind of jam pack them together a little bit. Not that they're the same, because there's different things happening at different places. Um, I was talking to my wife about this a couple of weeks ago because we're um, in terms of middle adulthood, kind of on the back part of it, and uh, we've always been pretty active for the most part in our life. And I mowed my yard yesterday, and it takes me longer to get over it than when I was 30. And that's one of the big changes. There's a physical change that happens as we get older, each decade. Um, and the reason why I'm bringing that up is because that decline can really be kind of work on you mentally too, as things decline, like physical decline. Doesn't mean that you can't overcome it and keep, like we can be physical, like for example, physical activity. We can be physically active for a long time in our life. We don't have to we're not just physically active in our 20s and 30s or teens. We can be physically active for a long time. It might, like I'm probably not gonna run an Ironman triathlon at this point in my life, unless I really was. I mean, I'd really have to be dedicated. Um, but it doesn't mean I can't do certain things physically. Um, so the same thing is true for our cognitive development. Our cognitive development doesn't just stop all of a sudden at the age of 25. We actually know that our brain is very elastic, even into late, 70s and 80s. Like we can actually learn new things for a long time. It might take a little bit longer sometimes, but one of the reasons why have always liked teaching at Amberton, and why I immediately said yes when they asked me to teach 10 years, almost 11 years ago now, is that I knew I was going to be teaching with adults, all ages of adults. And so it doesn't matter how old you are. I've had all the ages. I've worked with all the ages as students, and everyone can do the coursework. Maybe it takes some people a little bit longer than others, but like this is a lot of learning. There's a lot going on in this coursework as you go through the program. You're taking on a lot information wise, and that's because we can. Our brains are capable of doing that. Um, it just means we also need to have uh, a little bit better understanding of how we do it, maybe, but we can still do that. Um, the other thing that happens as we move into, especially like early adulthood into middle adulthood, your responsibilities increase, and whether that's financial responsibilities, your family responsibilities, then potentially maybe like taking care of your parents or making arrangements for your parent. There's a lot of responsibilities that increase during that time frame that you didn't necessarily have, let's say, in early adulthood or emerging adulthood. And then as you get to the tail end of that, especially, 60s and 70s, there's this kind of desire that you want to transmit or leave something meaningful to the next generation behind you, like a legacy type thought. And so these are all kind of things that are happening. Um, uh, and so um, there's always going to be different transitions too during this stage, like kids graduating, or maybe a parent dying. Um, Maybe there's like different, maybe you move and change jobs, and there's all kinds of different things that happen in this stage that not only are not necessarily bad things. There can be really difficult things and there can be good things, but some of the stressful things start to really happen during this time too, like a lot more different types of stress, which stress does very interesting things to us too. Um, it affects us mentally, physically, emotionally. It affects our relationships. Um, it affects us individually as well as like in our system. It affects us, and so um, the one thing that's that's interesting about as we get older, and these are all things that happen to us biologically or physically, but affect us mentally. Like I was talking about physical, like just kind of physical fitness or being active. Your eyesight declines, your hearing declines, the ways in which you think, like sometimes your processing speed slows a little bit. Like all of those things can have an effect on you mentally, but they're actually normal things to happen. I'm not saying we want them to happen, but those are things um, that can definitely happen. Um, and as a side note, like I was talking, I was talking to someone last weekend about they were I've been shaving my head for a long time, and they were making a joke about it, and I was thinking, like my brother, he started losing his hair when he was about 18, which is pretty early. But in my family, it's not, so he's always shaved his head. I mean, there's things like that. There's just these little things that happen that you don't really think about, but they can kind of weigh on you a little bit. And so, um, I was talking about one of the things I was talking about in terms of stress, and I'm working with a significant amount of people with pretty elevated stress right now. And so clinically speaking, like stress management becomes something that's very important in your clinical practice, I think. Now, stress is still there for kids or adolescents and adult. I mean, everyone has stress for sure. It's just a matter of like degree in terms of how much stress we have. And so we know a couple of things like your cortisol levels will be higher, and that's linked to certain health problems that you might have. Um, there's definitely stress. The stress level that you have is directly linked to cardiovascular, uh, your cardiovascular system, um, and then sometimes it's a matter of like how we eat or what we eat. Stress can cause us to eat or not eat, at different times too. So stress is something that becomes something that's very important to kind of think about. There's one thing I wanted to talk about. Let's see, I think it's on my other slide set here. I'm gonna pull up something here real quick. Someone wants to kind of talk about it. The other thing that happens is like relationships change, especially as we come out of um, adolescence into adulthood. I'm looking for something specific. I don't have. Just bear with me for a second. Sorry. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the other thing that will tend to start happening at some point, either in emerging adulthood or early adulthood, and that is like forming relationships, like getting married or dating. Um, get okay. There we go. Okay. Sorry, just took me a little while to find it. So I've even changed how I've talked about this topic, like attraction, love, close relationships. There was a time when mostly, um, like the data would mostly point to that mainly happening kind of in that 18 to 30 range. Now it's not necessarily the case. There's more folks that maybe don't have that are not getting married. In other words, the age of marriage is 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 growing. Like the average age of marriage is stretching out to the late 20s, and that's a it's a pretty big shift that we've had. And so when we think about it, there is a Stern this it's Sternberg's triangle of love is what it's called, but it's been around for a little while. I actually learned about it in my master's program that basically talks about attraction, love, close relationships, and kind of how they're formed. And this idea of the combination of passion, which is exactly what it sounds like, the lust, the flirting, the sexual intimacy, and then emotional intimacy, and being vulnerable enough to have emotional intimacy, and then commitment. When you put all three of those together, you have what's called consummate love. And if you have, maybe two of those without the third, um, or maybe even one of those without the other two, like for example, if a relationship is all passion with no intimacy and no commitment, it's really more of like infatuation. Um, it's kind of one night stand, hooking up culture kind of stuff. If you have what's called affectionate love, you might have intimacy and commitment, but there's not a lot of passion involved. Um, and then uh, if you have a lot of passion and a lot of commitment, but no intimacy, like there's a lack of like emotional connection, a lack of emotional intimacy. There's, you fatuous love, which is basically kind of like almost roommate-ish in nature. And the reason why I'm bringing all this up is I I have seen a change in because I worked with couples for a long time now, mostly couples for the last almost 15 years, and so I've definitely seen like a change in how, like in my marital work, and I work with people that are married or not married that are living together, have been together for a number of years or just a short amount of time, that fit all of these different uh, definitions. And one of the things that is true just of um, like the research will talk about, like for example, intimacy, like just being intimately connected with your partner. Um, uh, we're talking about um, like self-disclosure with them or sharing private thoughts, say in a safe way, like knowing you're safe enough to do that. Um, uh, Kind of not totally losing yourself into them, but feeling like you could and you're safe with them. Um, uh, and and also being able to talk about like your deepest desires and goals, and you know things that you're wanting, or maybe able to bring up things that are bothering you in a way that's safe. Like that type of intimacy, if that gets broken, then it can start to drift. And as that starts to drift, it will have a direct effect on other areas. It doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't committed anymore. It just means that that will have an effect on different areas of life. This is just an example. Um, uh, when you think about friendship, for example, inside of those three areas, friendship, and they're actually studying this a lot more now. I think the Gottman Institute has done quite a bit of study inside of like forming friendships with partners. Friendship plays such an important role, not just like at the beginning stages, but across the span of the relationship. Like having a friendship with your partner becomes extremely important, which is kind of interesting because you also want the romantic side. You kind of have the intimacy side, and you definitely have the commitment side. But friendship plays a strong role in your sexual compatibility and how um, you know, how intimate you are with them. That is a very that's becoming it's it kind of makes sense, like common sense when you think about it. But I find myself doing work when I'm working with couples now. I only work with a handful now, but when you work with couples long enough, you can do things in terms of the friendship, like just having them like become kind of friends again and letting them go back, maybe even go back to things that they did before. You know, they were, you know, they had a friendship before and they were able to, you know, rely on some of those things. That can be very, very helpful to them. But I think one of the things that, and this again goes back to what I said earlier, we don't typically have clients coming to us that are healthy and everything's great. It's usually, you know, people that are struggling, and that's true for couples. On average, couples wait 4 to 5 years too long before they'll go to therapy, and so by the time they come, you know, a lot of times things are, you know, kind of difficult, and they're really struggling, and so um, this idea of like falling out of love or drifting, um, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over years, and if people are intimately drifting or losing connection emotionally, it plays a large role in uh, all parts of their life. And um, there's lots of things that affect, like trust, how you communicate, how you handle conflict, um, your friendship. I mean, do you even like this person that you're with? I mean, there's all kinds of different things that happen, um, and so you you will try and try. Human beings will reach out and reach out and reach out and reach out, but only to a certain point. After they've reached out enough, they will stop reaching out. And you find yourself when you're thinking about when you start working with, if you work with couples, this is something that you'll see and hear um, pretty regularly. Um, and so I always I encourage people to, if you're going to work with couples, like if you're going to go the couples route, there's a couple of different models of therapy that I think are super uh, impactful when you work with couples. One's called emotionally focused therapy. Um, it was founded by Sue Johnson, who actually just passed away a couple weeks ago, um, or EFT for short. The other one is got the Gottman method, which John Gottman and his wife and his team have been studying and researching couples for over 30 years. These are readily available. You can find lots of information on these. And when you take the marriage and family therapy class with Dr. Hebert, he'll talk about these too. The Gottman method does give a lot of like kind of like practical steps and things to use. EFT does too. It's just a little bit different take. Um, but those two methods are very have been highly validated and have really good impact and effect on working with marriages. So those are two, I would say, if you kind of if you're going the couples route, those are definitely two methods that you would want to know because they have they're very impactful working with couples. And so um, so let me stop for a second. I just gave out a lot of information. Does this Are we tracking? We have any questions about anything I'm talking about? This would be a good time to kind of maybe stop and see if we have any questions.
Well, I can say I certainly understand the middle adulthood with you. That's what I wrote my paper on, you'll see. But all those things you were talking about, the physical changes and eyesights and all that stuff, man, I'm smack dab in the middle of that. So I get it. It's actually kind of good. And I wrote this in my paper. Like, I'm kind of glad to know actually what I'm going through as I'm going through it. And I actually enjoyed studying late adulthood as well because I know that's where we're going and that's where my parents are. So it gives me a perspective. But yeah,
Yep,
I get it.
yep, yep. Good. Yeah. Oh yeah, those papers to do today, huh? Awesome. I'm sure everyone's already written theirs. No one's going to be staying up today and turning it in like at midnight. Any other questions? All right, here's what we're going to do. I want to have like a little bit of a fun discussion. I'll put you in your groups for this. I want you to talk about your favorite, not least favorite parts about being an adult. I was talking to a group of us parents. We had our last band booster meeting this week. I have no idea how this topic came up, but we were all talking about like going back in time, being in high school again. I was like, you can't. There's not enough money in the world to pay me to be in high school again right now. Like I wouldn't do it. Some people would, and I wouldn't. But I'd love for you guys to talk amongst yourselves, just like, hey, what's your favorite thing about being an adult? Like, what do you love about it? I want you to talk about that. I'm going to do that. So you should see your link now. All right. What's everybody's favorite thing about being an adult?
I'll go. Not giving a damn.
Get off my lawn.
I love that.
Yeah.
No one's ever
That's
said
the
that.
one.
Nobody's
That's
ever
the
said
one
that.
right there.
I just don't give a damn. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, not sorry.
You don't have to care. Don't care what anybody thinks.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer to anybody.
Yeah.
I did say, man, being that
Mm.
wise old man. I mean, I enjoy that.
Yeah.
Whether it's wise or not, I can appear wise, I guess. But it's the gray, man. It's the gray, and the bald, the wrinkles, man. You get the
Yeah.
respect, I think.
Yeah.
You just have to say it confidently. That's all
That's
I have
right.
to say. And they're like,
That's
oh,
right.
yeah, you're probably right.
That's right. That's right. Fake it till you make it.
I'll add this, and I wrote about this in my paper also, is that like I enjoy it because where I am, I feel like I've got the respect of the youngs, and then I can have respect of the olds. So I think we're sitting in this little sweet spot where it's when you're 35 and 40 and you're out and you're in sales and you're talking to people my age and 55 and they're me going, all right, prove it. Or you know what I'm saying? So there's a different dynamic, I think, with both sides of the coin.
And we got a pretty good representation of ages here, too.
Yeah, what I was saying is I'm only 33. I'm probably one of the younger ones in the class, but
Not only you are 33.
I am 33. So what I was saying is each year just feeling like a little bit more like you're figuring out the world, like there's more clarity in the route, and you've just, probably have more routines that just work for you. So just feeling better in your skin, just feeling like you're moving through the world a little smoother. And I bet for everyone each year you get better. Everyone feels a little better.
Well, what you have you can look forward to. I don't give a damn, right, Ben? That's what we're trying to get to.
That's always the goal. That's always the
goal. Anybody else?
I mean, I'll speak. I have 4 kids. I've really, really enjoyed this stage of life, like raising my kids and kind of helping them into emerging adults. Got 3 in college, 1 in high school. And so that has been probably one of my favorite parts of adulthood, is just, raising them and kind of help guiding them through these transitions in life.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's good. I still need to get that atlas. I'm gonna have to get that atlas, Angela.
Hey, I actually asked my husband. He ordered it off of National Geographic and then just had it professionally framed.
All right, I love that.
Yeah,
but I love stuff like that. That's cool.
I was gonna say it's like.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's really big.
Yeah.
Takes the whole wall, which is what I needed.
Yeah, I never would have said, "Oh, as a 20-year-old, let me see that atlas."
Yeah, check out my atlas.
Look at that thing's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's huge. It's huge, and he said it came like rolled up.
Yeah,
just
yeah,
pulled
yeah,
up
yeah,
and he took it to like Aaron Frames or whatever and
yeah,
had it
yeah.
professionally framed.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Anybody else? What do you like about being an adult?
For me, I'm in my 20s, and so I'm enjoying like being independent, making my own decisions, learning from my mistakes and things like that.
Yeah, good, good. I think I think something that is good, something good to think about is kind of what you said, Erica. We're not, as we get older, we don't stop making mistakes. We should hopefully learn from them quicker as we get older. Usually, hopefully, right? So one of the things that I talk about, I'm teaching this class for the first time in person, and for the first time in 4 years in person this summer, teaching this lifespan class. I haven't taught it in person, maybe longer than that, probably 5 years. And a lot of times I would talk about uh, wisdom, like learning from your mistakes, was kind of how your experience gives you wisdom, right? Like that's kind of how you learn. I think it's important, clinically speaking, to think about that concept as you work with people because um, we can get trapped. Anybody, we can get trapped in this idea that we have to do things a certain way or be perfect how we do them, or um, and that's not really helpful. Really, it's more helpful to have a mindset of, oh man, I think I messed that up. Let me see if I can do that better. Or, whatever. Like, how can I get better? What can I do better? How can I grow from that? And that mindset really helps, I think, a lot. So, anyone else want to share? We're going to move on. I'm gonna let Ben have the quote of the day. That's the quote of
Mhm.
the day right there. That's good. Okay, let me share with you guys a couple of things. I'm gonna do some. I do this with all my lifespan classes towards the end, and this is all in the sphere of adulthood. Um, there are going to be a few areas, clinically speaking, with adults that you work with that are probably going to come up. Um, uh, and some of these things I'm going to kind of hit today, but you're going to talk a lot more about in other classes, specifically like working with these folks. One of the things about the paper that I wanted people to do is not just bring up like a disorder or an issue, but I wanted you to start thinking about and looking for like how you treat those things, like how you work with people with those disorders or issues. Some of those disorders and issues are going to be everything from like we talked about parenting, anything to do with marriage or relationships for sure. There's going to be, depending on ages, not just people in their 20s anymore, but even people's in their 30s and 40s are thinking about career, like making career shifts, like doing one thing and then maybe doing another thing, like probably some of the people in this class. Those topics are going to come up. There's always going to be discussions about like depression, anxiety, substance and alcohol use, conflict, like whether conflict at home in relationships or conflict at work or conflict with family. Those are topics that will always probably come up. And then some things to think about in terms of uh, just working with adults. I think it's important, and this is another reason why I wanted you to write the paper in the way that I wanted you to write it. It's important to really realize, okay, um, the developmental stages that someone or the developmental stage that someone's in, there's some markers there, right, that are happening anyway. And I think it's important for us to kind of know what those things are as we go through them. For example, I've started working more with uh, people that are like either just retiring or kind of early in retirement, and some of them are struggling because they had an idea of retirement, but it's not really been the way they thought it was going to be. And then all of a sudden they're at home with their spouse and maybe they don't get along as well as they kind of thought they would. I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening. And the interesting thing is there's some normal transition developmental stages that folks are going through. Like I was talking about legacy before, the way in which you leave the world becomes really important. Some things like financial security, you've probably already secured it, so it's a little bit less important to some people, depending on who you are. But one of the things that's happening with the older adult world, and this is where I'm talking about 60s and 70s mainly. Most people are retiring, but they're not retiring. People are stopping doing whatever they were doing for X amount of years and retiring from that, but also starting like doing other things, which I think is not, I don't necessarily think is a bad idea. Um, and so one of the things that if you work with adults, especially older adults, like if you start working with clients and you open yourself up to clients that are 60s, 70s, you'll start seeing some of those things too, like this kind of like retirement year kind of deal. Um, I can remember growing up, I think, the age of retirement in the 60s, 70s, 80s is way different than it is now in terms of like just the age. And I can remember growing up, like I grew up in a really small town and like my aunts and uncles, like I think my aunt was like 60 and retired, like fully retired. And I mean, you know, they lived in the same house their whole life. I mean, that kind of stuff. I mean, this isn't happening. Stuff like that's not happening as much anymore. People are retiring, but they're, doing other things too on top of that. And because of that, they have an expectation of what might happen. And when that doesn't happen, it kind of throws them off a little bit. So if you open yourself up clinically to work with folks that are going through that, you'll see a lot of that happening. The stuff that you usually work with when it comes to like people like 30s, 40s, 50s is a little different, but it's a lot of the stuff I was mentioning before. A lot of relationship work stuff, conflict, definitely like mood disorder type stuff. Um, One of the things that I would encourage everyone to do, and I think I talked about this a little bit last time, I would encourage you guys to start really, thinking about like, how would you work with folks that are saying, hey man, my anxiety is just like, through the roof. I'm having trouble, you know, I'm getting really anxious. I'm panicky, that type stuff. The quicker you can start learning like interventions to work on with that, I think that can be very helpful for you. Same thing with depression, and those are across lifespan developmental stages. That people struggle with those things just in general. I think that can be helpful. The other thing is, like I said, you're going to have other classes like the alcohol and substance abuse class or addiction class that'll talk a lot about addiction and working with, treating, diagnosing that. So you'll get a lot of experience kind of walking through that and what that looks like. The same thing with the psychopathology class. You'll talk about it from the child and adolescent, and then the adult. I think he calls it geriatric, but it's an adult. Kind of splits it up into two different areas, and so that'll be helpful too for you. Keeping in mind that what we've talked about in this class has been, hey, every stage have these kind of times of transition and things that are happening. When we think about the view of the self in childhood and then the identity, like really adolescent into emerging adulthood, that identity is usually fairly solid coming into like young adulthood and middle adulthood. Then the stages kind of shift and change where it's kind of like, okay, now what am I leaving? I've been working for something. Now what am I leaving behind? And I think the other thing that to think about would be uh, uh, I would say this stress management, at least clinically speaking for me, stress management has become a massive, massive thing that everybody is struggling with. Because we don't stop stress, right? Like everything that happens to us especially things we don't have any really control over, like they're just happening, can be stressful. But we can manage how we respond and react to it, and we can always manage how we take care of ourselves too. And so that's becoming a large piece of the literature is kind of stress management. So those are just kind of like, I would say these are the big areas, clinically speaking, that you're going to see. It all kind of makes sense, when you think about it. But I think it's good to have a perspective of, how can I help people? What theory am I using? What model am I using? But also, like, what stage of development are they in? Randy was asking a question at the very beginning about like parenting stuff. It's really hard when you're working with an adult who has a teenage a teenage kid that is pushing the boundaries, or something's going on. Well, that's a normal developmental thing for kids to do, is push for independence, push the boundaries. It doesn't feel good. I'm not saying you like it, but it's a normal thing to do. So helping parents understand that, but also kind of walk through it themselves. I mean, the issue is that anxiety can take over, and all of a sudden our kids pushing the boundaries, and then they're homeless. I mean, it's like we go from one thing to the next pretty quick, and that's not necessarily the case. I'm not saying that consequences are all of a sudden smaller. Consequences are bigger as we get older, for sure. But these are just examples of things that you're gonna run into, clinically speaking. And so I just think it's good to start. It's okay to kind of start thinking about, hey, how would I work with someone that's struggling with these certain things? The good news is, you're going to take more classes that are going to help with a lot of these areas, for sure. And then by the time you get to your practicum, then you're starting to work with people, kind of starting to put everything together. It'll make a lot more sense to you. So I know some people are just starting in the program, and then some people are, kind of on the tail end of the program, and then we got everything in between. So I, I just want you to kind of keep thinking about. I think it's important to keep thinking about, hey, you know, let me start thinking about how I'm going to help people in these different categories. I think that's helpful. So, okay, having said all of that, um, I wanted to save some time for questions. And if you don't have any questions, that's fine. But you guys have any questions about anything? Could be class related, could be, you know, anything related. Like, does anybody have any questions about anything?
How much is the paper worth in our grade?
Oh, yeah, the paper's 100 points.
I'm sorry.
It's 100 points.
Okay.
So the
Because
ex-
I guess the reason why I'm asking is the syllabus was a little confusing because it had a final exam on there,
yeah.
kind of worked in, but we don't have a final exam. So I didn't know the percentage, like how heavily weighted was the paper. Or is
So
the
yeah, I
paper.
took the exam out. So the paper is 100 points, but the exercises is a total of 160 points. So the exercises actually are a little bit more heavily weighted than the paper. And then the midterm's only 25.
Okay.
Um, yeah, the midterm has also a second part that says midterm upload. And I had no clue what was supposed to be uploaded there. Am I the one lost? I think I sent you, I put a note in there. I don't know what, because I did the meeting, but there was a second part on the model that was supposed to be uploaded. I don't know what was supposed to be
No,
uploaded.
that's me. I upload that. That's for me. That's for the grade. I put the grade
Oh,
in. See,
my
I have
bad.
to create a folder on Moodle so that I can add the grade. So it looks a little bit confusing. So what happens is when you guys take the exam, I actually can go on the site and I get everyone's grade, and I put the grade in directly. So it looks like an assignment
Um,
basically. But it's me just
Okay.
Otherwise, if I don't do it that way and I just put it straight into the grade book and then no one can see it, everyone asks me a million questions about where's my grade for the final, the midterm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I need to, because I went and loaded the study guide in there because I didn't know what to put in there. And I sent
No,
an
no,
email, but I will,
no, you're fine.
because I worked on the study guide when I was
Yeah.
studying. So I guess I hope I can delete it. So
I
my
do,
apologies. I
it
don't know
doesn't
what
matter. It's
to do
fine.
with that.
It won't hurt
Okay.
anything. I've already put all the grades in. That's all we need.
Okay.
So you're good. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Mhm.
sir. One last question. And exercises we email to you. Sorry, the module thing, I'm learning module, Moodle, I think that's what's called. We email it to you, right? The exercises, we are emailing them to you, or we're uploading them in Moodle.
Put them in Moodle. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Angela, your question, I think the paper's worth like 35%.
Okay.
I cannot go on camera. I have a migraine, so I'm not camera ready. But
No, it's okay.
I I am really struggling with my paper because I've spent a lot of hours researching, and number one, I feel a little intimidated because I chose attachment, and you shared that you have heavily worked on that. Um, but I guess my question is, I'm not finding, I have a ton of scholarly articles, but I couldn't find specific middle age and how attachment. It was just adult attachment.
Yeah, that's
Is that
fine. Yeah, that's fine.
okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, don't be intimidated by anything I say. Please, you guys are. I read all the papers with the eye for you guys are learning, and this is something that's new, and especially maybe some people this is the first research paper they've either written in their life or written in like 20 years. So don't worry about that. But yeah, you can do it from the standpoint of adult attachment. That's fine.
Okay. And the other thing is every everyone categorizes it differently, like
Hmm.
the words and the terms. So like if I have as long as I like cite why I'm calling
Hmm.
it this or that,
Yep.
are we
Yep.
good?
Yep. That's good.
I have spent so many hours like
Good. Yeah. Good.
I don't feel like yeah. I think you could spend like a lifetime researching attachment is what I'm finding. Maybe not a
Oh
lifetime.
yeah. Oh yeah. 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 I don't know if y'all can see, but my bookshelf. I got one bookshelf up. I have two. I have two shelves worth of attachment material, and that's not a fraction. So yeah, don't just yeah. This is just meant to kind of get you started in those areas,
Okay.
um, but yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just as long as you guys meet the criteria, that's all I'm looking for.
Maybe I'm overthinker.
That's
And
okay.
it's my first one too, so thanks.
Yeah, no problem. What else? Anybody else?
Hey, I'm not trying to blow smoke up your butt just because it's the end of the semester, but I really enjoyed this class. Like, I think I
Good.
got more out of this class, like even like with like say all the modalities and stuff, because it just gave me such a good perspective that probably explains a little bit of my life. I mean, I just think it was more like I don't know, it was just a really informative class, and I really enjoyed it.
Good.
I
Thank
really
you.
wish this would have been like in a classroom setting, because I think you're a professor that encourages that bounces back and forth, and I enjoy that. That would have been a good class in person for sure.
Well, all you gotta do is retake it this summer on Wednesday nights in Frisco.
Well,
I'll be
thanks to
there.
you and your paper, I'm taking the summer off, man.
Yeah, I haven't taught it in person since before COVID.
Yeah, this just seems like one of those great classes because it's something that, I mean, obviously everybody has something to contribute because
Mhm.
we're living life and we're in some stage of that, even if, like we talked about, within a stage of
Right.
that development, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Anybody else?
I have a question. Forgive
Yep.
me. Um I am trying to make sure I got all my everything together, and I was trying to make mistakes. I had 3 classes this semester until I finished. So this is my last hurrah home. So forgive me, Dr. Nat. For the exercises, we're only supposed to do 2, right? Because I had done 3 that I was gonna upload, only 2.
Right.
Okay, so I don't need a third one. Okay.
Yep. You got it.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm trying to gather everything for the last lap.
No, you're good. You're good. And I will be grading I just finished the 3rd exercise. I'll be grading the 4th exercise and the paper this week. And I'll probably have that to you guys by, hopefully Thursday or Friday. The semester ends on Thursday, but and then the grades are usually you probably won't get your grade until not this week, but the next week, more than likely. It'll be because everybody, once you turn the grades in, they got to record them all, and it takes a little while. So you'll probably get your grades like the week of, probably the week of whatever the week of the 19th or 18th, whatever that Monday is. You'll probably get them that week, I bet. So, all right. I think that's it. If there's no more questions, then we can all go enjoy our Saturday and go do something else. All right. I've enjoyed having you guys in class, and hopefully I'll see you in another class down the road, either in person or virtually. So you guys have a good weekend.
Sounds good. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye, guys.
All right,
And
thank
can
you.
I step back and talk to you for a minute, please?
Sure. Yeah.
I found that my grade is not showing yet on the big time. I know I was the one that dropped the ball. I emailed you.
Yeah, I probably just
That's
haven't
all.
recorded it yet. I'll do that today though.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll take care
And
of it.
I'll upload the rest today, please.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank
Yeah,
you, sir. Okay.
you bet.
Thank you so much.
You
All
bet.
right. Bye.
Bye-bye.